Be'ezrat Hashem, with Hashem's help, we begin today a new set of laws. The fourth, in the fourth book of the Rambam, Hilchos Naarah Besulah, the laws of the virgin girl. There's three special scenarios where we have mitzvahs that relate to a girl who is a virgin. The Rambam, as he always does, begins with the list of the mitzvahs that are going to be discussed in this set of laws. Says the Rambam, Yesh bichlolon chamesh mitzvahs. We're going to be discussing 5 mitzvahs over the coming 3 days. Shalish mitzvahs asay, shtei mitzvahs leis asay, 3 positive and 2 negative, v'zehu praton. These are their details. Aleph, liknois hamefata. Number 1, there's a mitzvah to fine a man who seduces another girl, a virgin girl specifically, into a consensual relationship. Beis, sheyisa ha'oines anusasay. If a man rapes a virgin girl, there's a mitzvah for him to marry her. Gimel, shalo yegaresh ha'oines. There's a prohibition that the rapist cannot divorce the woman whom he rapes. Dalet, sheteshev eishes moitzi shem ra tachas bailo lo'elam. A man who spreads a false rumor about his virgin wife must remain married to him forever. Hey, shalo yegaresh moitzi shem. I'm sorry, what did I say? She must stay married to him. If he spreads a bad rumor, she must stay married to him. Yeah, excuse me. Hey, shalo yegarish moitzi shem ra'as ishtei. The prohibition, the same thing in negative terms. A man who spreads a bad rumor about his virgin wife may not divorce her. Ubir mitzvahs elu biprakim elu. The explanation of these mitzvahs is coming in the following chapters. Just so we have clarity, because the Rambam is going to be referring many times back to the verses. So let's just take a look in the Torah to what it says about a rapist and a seducer. So this is the verse from Parshat Ki Teitzei, and it says in the Torah, Ki yimtza ish Naarah v'tula asher lo orasa. If a man finds a virgin girl who was never consecrated, utfasa v'shachav ima, and he grabs hold of her and he lies with her, v'nimtzao, when they're discovered, v'natan ha'ish hashochev ima la'avi ha'na'ara 50 kasef. So first of all, the man who did the rape needs to pay a fine of 50 silver coins to the father. V'lo tiyeh li'isha tachat asherina, and she needs to become his wife because he caused her pain. Lo yuchal shalcha kol yamav. He cannot send her away for all of his days. Okay, I know in the list of mitzvahs, the Rambam didn't mention the fine for the rapist. He only mentioned the fine for the seducer, but we'll soon see about that. The basic halacha is that if a man rapes a woman, he has to pay a fine, plus stay married to her. Then we have the verse that applies to the seducer. This is earlier in the Torah, Parshat Mishpatim. It says, "V'chi yefate ish betula shelo orasa." If a man seduces a virgin girl who was never consecrated, v'shachav ima, and he lies with her, mahor yimharena lo isha. The ideal scenario is to take her in marriage. Ima'en aviha litita lo. If the father refuses, then kesef yishkol, he has to give a fine. He has to pay money, kemohar habetulot, the amount that would usually be paid for a virgin. The simple understanding is the amount that you would usually pay for raping a virgin. Same when you rape a girl. You have to pay 50 silver coins. So over here also, if you just seduced her, so there's less of a reason to fine you because it was consensual. However, if there's no marriage happening, then you do have to pay a fine. Now, just before we go into the halachot, I need to make a disclaimer. This is one of those mitzvahs where it's hard to understand the Torah. Okay, as many justifications as we give for this mitzvah, as we learn the details of the halachas, it becomes a little gray. Because classically you'll hear when you ask, how could it be that the Torah says that a rapist should marry the woman that he raped, that they should separate and go their own ways for sure. So the classic answer that's given, well, there's 2 classic answers. One is the chinuch. He gives a little bit of a reason for each mitzvah. He says, this is a deterrent. Not so much that it's justified the marriage to happen itself, but if the guy knows that after he rapes a girl, he's going to be forced to stay married to her and provide for her for the rest of her life, so it's a deterrent, he's not going to do it. The other classic answer that's given is that you have to understand the context of the times. In those times, marriage was primarily not an emotional relationship. Marriage was primarily a way to have a roof over your head, shelter, and food. It was guaranteed life support. It wasn't about the heart and all of that it is today, when we can afford. No, it wasn't about it. It wasn't about it. When a woman was raped, she became damaged goods. Nobody would want to take her in marriage ever after that. So if you leave her hanging, essentially you're letting her suffer on both accounts. She was raped, she loses her own personal dignity. Plus, nobody's going to want to marry her in the future. So, to the contrary, the Torah puts in this mitzvah to protect women's rights. Torah is the earliest champion of women's rights. In that, now, by forcing the rapist to marry her, what's going to happen is she's going to have shelter and a roof and support for the rest of her life. It's a nice idea, but as you're going to see, it doesn't necessarily hold water fully in all the cases, because once a girl is past 12 and a half, there's no force to marry. Only up until 12 and a half. So how do you explain all of those cases? There's many cases where the guy walks away with not paying a fine. How do you explain those cases? At the end of the day, this is one of the mitzvahs that it's Hashem's will, and just because it doesn't fit with modern sensibilities, doesn't mean we throw the baby out with the bathwater. We have to do our best to understand Hashem's wisdom, and whatever we can understand, we understand. Whatever we don't, we say, you know what, Hashem is, in His ultimate wisdom, understands the true workings of humanity, and He makes the mitzvahs as He sees fit. With that, let's begin the actual Rambam, Perek Risha in chapter 1, Halacha Aleph. Misha Pita Besulah. One who seduces a virgin, Kainsin Oisai Mishkal Chamishim Slayim Shal Kesef Mezukak. We fine him a monetary fine. He needs to pay out the weight of 50 pure silver coins. The Rambam told us in earlier halachot that in those times the silver coins weren't pure silver. They were only 1/8 silver. So it's not 50 of the common silver coins. It's 50 pure silver coins. V'huwa nikra knas. This is called, in the Torah, in the Talmud, and in all of these halachot, knas, the fine. The fine is a reference to the fine paid by a man who seduces a virgin girl. V'chein im onas oisa. The same thing applies if he rapes her. He also needs to pay a fine of 50 silver coins. The commentaries explain, if you look in the Torah, we saw before, the fine is only said clearly by the rapist. The Rambam is making it first the seducer, and also if he rapes, he pays the fine. So the commentaries say that Rambam goes in the order of the Torah. The seducer is in Parshat Mishpatim, in Exodus. The rapist is in Parshat Kiteitzei, in Chumash Devarim. So the Rambam goes in order of the Torah since his book is based on the Torah. In the beginning, way back in the introduction, he said, all I want and my final goal is that a person should read the written Torah and then come to my book. So he likes to follow the order of the Torah. This fine is a biblical positive commandment. Shenemar, as it says, and you see it here in the red letters, the man who lie with her needs to give the father of the girl 50 50 silver coins. What is considered a seducer and what is a rapist? A seducer means he's engaging in relations with her consent. A rapist, he's having relations with her against her will. Says the Rambam, if we observe a girl having relations in a field, in an open area, outside of the city limits, she can presumed to be raped. She can be presumed to be raped. And we treat her in the courts as a girl who was raped, until we have clear testimony saying that she was engaged in relations with her consent. On the other hand, if a woman is seen engaging in relations in the city, we can assume that she has been seduced. It's consensual because she didn't cry out. And typically, she would do that if she was in the city because people could hear her if she was actually being raped. If we don't see any crying out, we can assume she's seduced. Unless we have witnesses testifying that she was raped and they have a good reason why she wasn't screaming. For example, they say, we saw the man pull out a sword, and tell her, if you scream, I'm going to kill you. So because of that, that would be a way to know that even in the city, she is not being seduced, she's being raped. Halacha Gimel, if the seduced girl does not want to marry the seducer, or the father of hers doesn't want to give her away, as we saw in the verse here, if the father refuses to give it to her, or even if the seducer himself doesn't want to get married, he just simply gives the fine and leaves. There's no force on him to marry her. But if they did agree, and he ends up marrying the girl he seduced, the seducer does not pay the fine. He simply writes her a ketubah document like any other virgin. It says in the first verse here, Mahor yimharena lo isha. You have to dictate a price, a ketubah, for a wife. And here the Rambam says you give her a ketubah like a virgin. Remember in the laws of marriage, for a virgin girl it's $200, for a non-virgin girl it's $100. Here he seduced her. By the time he's marrying her, she's no longer a virgin. Nevertheless, because he began the process when she was a virgin, so we pay her like a virgin. Although Tosfos argues and says that you only give her 100, but Rambam rules, and there's a hint for this in this verse, in the end of the verse. Kesef yishkol kimohar habetulot. You have to give like the price of a virgin. Even though that's talking about the fine, not the ketubah, but there's definitely a hint there that you write her a ketubah like a regular virgin girl.
You said $120.
Yeah, I know. I'm just using equivalents. It's not it's zuzim, silver coins, of course. Aval ha'anusa. But in the case of the rape, if the girl who was raped did not want, or her father did not want to marry the rapist, they have the authority, and v'noisin knas v'hoylech, he gives the fine and he departs. But if they do want, just he doesn't want, we force him, he must marry her and pay the fine. Because it says over here, she must be to him for a wife. That's a positive commandment. Even if she's crippled or blind or has leprosy. We force him to marry. That's the consequences of your own actions. That's the key word there. He cannot divorce her on his own volition, ever if he wants. As it says, he cannot send her away all of his days. If I'm reading the verse right here, it says shalcha, not l'shalcha. That is a negative commandment. Halacha dalid ve'ein la ksuba. Counterintuitively, when a rapist marries the woman he raped, he does not give her a ketubah. There's no marriage document. Remember the laws of marriage, we said the only reason the sages enacted giving a ketubah to a woman is so it shouldn't be light for you to divorce her. But you can't divorce this woman. This man cannot divorce his wife, so there's no need to have that protection of the marriage document. Halacha hey, hoisa anusazu asura alav. What if the girl he raped, he was prohibited to marry? Even if she's only prohibited for a positive commandment, even if only rabbinically, he should not marry her. Similarly, if after he marries her, she becomes adulterous, he finds some adultery in her, he may divorce her. As it says, she must be his wife, but in the context of the Hebrew grammar, it sounds like it's saying, Isha hara'uya loy. She needs to be a wife that's fit for him. If she's forbidden to him from the Torah, or if she becomes adulterous, we don't force him to stay together. Now think about this. This is a bit tough to understand. The guy raped, he's not the most holy guy, you know what I'm saying? And he's then accusing his wife of doing adultery and sending her out. Okay, but this is the Torah here. Halacha is not always understood 100%. If he finds adultery in her, he can divorce her. Halacha vav, kohen gadol she'anas Besulah shapita is the high priest rapes a virgin or seduces her. Hareze lo yichnes. He cannot marry her. Because he is commanded to marry only a virgin girl. When he's going to marry this girl, she's not going to be a virgin. And if he marries her, he has to divorce her with a proper divorce document. Again, it's hard to understand. He's claiming the holy card, right? He's claiming the high priest card, not to marry her. But then, he was very holy when he raped her, you understand?
It's not fair to her.
It's not fair. I agree. But this is the law. Halacha zayin, afal pisha nemar ba'onis. Lo yuchal leshalcha. Even though it says by a rapist that he cannot send her away, kevan shekad mayaseh. Since in the verse, first it says a positive commandment, shenemar v'lo yisiya leisha, she should be his wife. Harezen nitkai la'aseh. The Torah has linked the negative commandment to the positive commandment. V'nimtzei zu mitzvahs lo yisaseh, shenitka la'aseh. This is called a negative commandment that is rectifiable by a positive commandment. She'ein loikin aleha elohim loikiyem aseh shaba. You never get lashes for violating this transgression unless you make the fulfillment of the positive commandment impossible. As will be explained in the 14th book of the Rambam in the laws of Sanhedrin. In other words, what's happening over here? This is a very big concept in Allah. It's called the lav hanitak la'aseh, a prohibition that can be rectified by a positive commandment. Classic example, then I'll translate it back to here. Classic example is what it says about robbing. Lo tigzol, you're not allowed to rob an object from somebody else, but if you did, veheshivet hagzela asher gazal, you have a mitzvah to return the robbed object that you stole. So, when you rob, we can't hold you accountable. We can't give you lashes, because maybe tomorrow you're going to give it back. What if you burn the object? Now it's impossible for you to ever fulfill the positive commandment. That's when you get lashes. So over here also, the Torah describes the mitzvah with a positive and a negative commandment. She should be your wife. You cannot divorce her. Just because he divorces her doesn't mean he gets lashes. Maybe he'll remarry her. Therefore, we can never give him lashes till he makes the fulfillment impossible. For example, therefore, says the Rambam, if a rapist transgresses the mitzvah and divorces his wife, we force him to remarry her with no lashes. But if the divorcee dies before he has a chance to remarry her, or she accepts consecration from another man, in which case he can never remarry her, so now there's become an impossibility to fulfill the positive commandment. Or he was a Kohen who cannot marry a divorcee, and now he gets lashes, because now by divorcing her, he's made the remarriage impossible. So in this case, he'll be getting lashes. Because at this point, he's transgressed the negative commandment with no possibility to fulfill the positive commandment. Here, by the way, it's different than the case of the robbing. In the case of the robbing, he himself would have to make the mitzvah impossible. He himself would have to burn the robbed object. But over here, someone else is getting in the way. She died, or she got consecrated to someone else, and still, since he can no longer do the mitzvah, he's done, and he gets lashes.
Same thing.
In the case of the robbed object, it's a machlekes. If you didn't nullify the possibility, then maybe you can't be held accountable.
If a Kohen Gadol rape, can he still be a Kohen?
Yeah, that's the funny thing. He's the high priest. Do it all. Maybe look, I'm thinking maybe it was just said in the case of like the second temple when there was anyway not the most righteous Kohen Gadol. It's really not fair. It's really not fair. It's really not fair. When I was reading the halakha, I was like, when the high priest rapes the girl, the ending should be he's no longer holy. Get out of here. But no. Halakha ches. The Rambam is now going to define the parameters for the fine. A rapist or a seducer is only liable to the fine if he has relations in the normal manner and with witnesses. But no warning is required. Usually the witnesses have to warn you, like in Shabbat, before they punish you, you have to warn you. No warning over here necessary. When does a girl get her fine, begin getting her fine? From when she turns 3 till she becomes a bogeret. Remember this chart? Ktana, when a girl is born, she's called a child. At age 12, when she begins to show the first signs of puberty, she becomes a Naarah for 6 months. Then at 12 and a half, she becomes a bogeret. So the Rambam over here says that it begins at age 3 until she becomes a bogeret, till 6 months after showing the first signs of puberty. Even though in the Torah, the word that's used is Naarah, and Naarah means only from the beginning of puberty, nevertheless, the Rambam understands that it begins at 3 years old. Others say it's actually only in that 6-month window. But the Rambam holds it's from 3 years old till she becomes a bogeret. If she had relations by rape within the first 3 years of her life, ein bi'asabiyah. The relations have no significance. Even physiologically, the Talmud says her hymen will grow back, so she'll retain her virginity. Yeah. And that's why there's no fine. Ba'alea misha bagra. If he has relations with her after she becomes fully mature, 6 months after showing the first signs of puberty, ein laknas, also no fine. Shenemar, because it says, Naarah Besulah. See? She has to be a young girl. Loy habaygeres, not fully major. Does it make sense? No. The logic is the same. She's 12 and a half. She's 13.
Between 12 and 12 and a half.
Huh? So I said, some authorities do say that, but the Rambam says from 3 to 12 and a half. But since it says Naarah, so the Torah's law only applies to the young girl.
Probably because back then, after 12 and a half, most people were
We're already married. That could be. That could be. There's also some that say that the begeris doesn't have virginity anymore.
What is the definition?
So he didn't violate any
What is the
virginity there.
definition of the rape? Darko, below the
Darko, only darko.
below the darko is not rape.
Not for the laws of the fine. Still rape. I mean, you did it against her will, but that doesn't require you to pay the fine.
And how come we don't need any warning?
How come you don't need any warning? A warning is necessary only before infliction of the punishments of execution or lashes, not for monetary punishments. Halacha tes va'achas sheyesh la'av va'achas she'ein la'av. Whether a girl has a father or not, yesh la knas, she gets a fine. This is a novelty because the Torah says v'natana isha shechev ima la'aviha na'ara. You give the fine to the father of the girl. Nevertheless, the Torah says that's just circumstantial. If she doesn't have a father, you still have to pay the fine. It goes to her. Ve'elu she'ein lahen knas. The following girls do not get a fine, even if they're raped. Habaygeres, a woman past the age of full majority. V'hammo'enes, a girl who has previously dissolved the marriage through miyun. She was married once as a minor. She dissolved that marriage through refusal. Then she was raped. No fine. V'ha'ailenis, a woman who is known to be physically barren. V'hashoita v'hachereshes, and a mentally disturbed girl and a deaf mute. Umisha yatsa aleha shem Rabbi Yaldusa, somebody who has a bad rumor about her when she was young. Two men come and say that the girl actually asked them, she propositioned them for promiscuity. And a girl who was divorced out of a marriage that was typically consummated. She went into seclusion with another man in the context of their marriage. Then she was divorced, but she's still a virgin. They never had relations. In all of these cases, she gets no fine. But if a woman was divorced out of a marriage that was only consecrated, it wasn't actually consummated, the man gave the woman a ring and then divorced her. Im nensa, if afterwards she was raped, yesh la knas, she does get a fine. Uknasa la'atzma, but she gets it herself, not her father. She's already out of her father's jurisdiction. V'im nispatza ein la knas, but if such a woman in this situation was only seduced, she gets no fine. Halacha yud, hagiyeres v'hashvuya v'hameshuchreres, a convert, a woman who was held captive, and a woman who was freed from slavery. We saw in the laws of marriage that these three types of girls are always assumed to have been in relation unless we know otherwise. So, therefore, the Rambam says about these girls, if she changed her status, she converted, or she was freed, or she was redeemed from captivity before age 3, yesh la knas, she gets a fine. Because even if she was raped, before age 3, her virginity is intact, and later on when she's raped, it's like raping a regular virgin and you have to pay the fine. But she was already older than 3 after, and then converted, then was redeemed, or then was freed from slavery, ein la knas, she gets no fine. Since at that point relations with them is significant, when they change status, they're considered to have already been engaged in relations, and there's no fine for them. Halacha Yud Aleph, an interesting concept. Besulah zu asura al ha'oines oya mefata. What if the virgin was technically outside of this rape? If you would have asked, can this guy marry this girl, she would be forbidden, the rapist or the seducer. So in prohibitions of marriage, we've seen in the laws of marriage, four levels. Erva, that's the highest level, which is either a penalty of excision or death. Chayavei lavin, negative prohibition. Chayavei aseh, positive commandment. Or shniya, rabbinic prohibition. So the Rambam categorizes shniya, it's only rabbinic, rabbanan. So the Rambam categorizes based on this. Im haisa achas mechayavei krisos. If the woman was a woman who typically you would get karet, you would get excision for having relations with her, like your sister, your aunt, or a woman who's on her period, and she didn't go to mikvah yet. Or she was a girl who was forbidden on a negative prohibition. A mamzeret, for example. Okay? So for these women, outside of rape, let's say in general, if you would have relations with them, you would have to get lashes by the court. When you violate a negative prohibition or you violate a karet prohibition, even though Hashem is going to take care of you, the court would also give you lashes. So here we have a principle that says you can never get 2 punishments for one act. So therefore, in hisrubai, if the rapist was warned before he raped this girl, he only gets lashes on account of having relations with a woman who's forbidden to him on penalty of karet or negative prohibition. But no fine. A person never gets lashes and pays. But if there was no warning, since when there's no warning you cannot get lashes, you still must pay the fine to this girl. If she was only prohibited by a positive commandment or by a rabbinic prohibition, and whether you were warned or not, you must pay the fine because there is no lashes. So that's all if they were punishable by lashes or by excision. What if the girl that he raped was a girl who typically you would get killed by the court, capital punishment for having relations with her? Like your daughter-in-law, or somebody like that. So here, whether or not they warned you, you're exempt from paying the fine. And this ties into an interesting general halachic principle. The general halachic principle is called kamle b'derabba mineh, which means if a person does an act for which he's obligated two punishments, death and monetary payment, you only impose the stricter punishment, the death punishment, and you don't pay the fine. Now, death punishment you can only get if you did the act with a warning, or you did the act willfully on purpose. What if you were unaware? What if you did an act which gets you the death penalty and a monetary payment, but practically you're not going to get killed? So some would think that you should still pay the money. Because the whole idea is you only give the more severe punishment. Here, where you're not giving the more severe punishment, you should get the lesser punishment. But here we have a rule that says no. Even if it's a case for which you get capital punishment, even if in the end you're not going to get the capital punishment, that already exempts you from the money. And this we learn from the law of the pregnant woman. This is a verse that says, two men are fighting with each other. They're punching each other in the face. The woman that wasn't part of the intention. Right. And then v'nagfu isha hara. By mistake, they strike a pregnant woman, v'yatzu yiladeha, and she loses the fetus. V'lo yiya asain, but there's no death for the woman. The woman doesn't die. Only the fetuses die. Then anaishi anaish, he needs to be punished and pay the monetary value of the fetuses. Which implies that if the woman would die, then you don't pay. Okay? This is the basic rule about a pregnant woman. Now, the truth is, even if the woman
would die, then...
So the truth is, even if the woman would die, the man who struck her would not get killed, because he only struck her unintentionally.
Okay, but
Nevertheless, the Torah says that the only time you pay money is if there's no death. That means that if there could be, that means that even in a case where you won't get a death penalty, you don't pay anymore. So let's see it inside. Shenemar, it says in the verse, V'lo yiyeh asain anesh anesh. When two people strike a pregnant woman by mistake, only if there's no death, that's when they get punished. Ha'im hayasham asain, ein sham einash, which implies that if the woman did die, there would be no monetary punishment. Now, 1 second. Even though in this case the woman was killed by mistake, which means because they didn't intend to kill her. Two men are fighting, and they hit a woman by mistake. So the man anyway would not be getting killed. Nevertheless, the fact that there is a death penalty in the air already exempts the monetary punishment. From here you learn that when it comes to a death tragedy, the Torah never differentiates between inadvertent and purposeful with regards to exempting payment. The minute you enter into the arena of death penalty, even if you yourself aren't getting killed, there's already an exemption from payment. Therefore, translating back to our case, if a man were to rape his daughter or daughter-in-law, even if he wasn't warned, in which case he would not get killed, he doesn't pay the fine.
If he was warned, then he gets killed.
Well, then for sure he gets killed.
He gets
and
fined, not fined.
No, and then for sure you're exempt from the fine. The chidush, the novelty is that even if you're not getting killed,
right,
you don't pay the fine either.
So the key is in the warning. Exactly.
Another source for this concept in the Torah, it says, if a man strikes the life out of an animal, he must pay compensation for it. And if a man strikes a person and kills him, he must be killed. So this is actually two different verses, but they're right near each other. This is the beginning of one verse, and then 3 verses later, Makeh Adam Yumat. So that compares the striking of an animal to the striking of a human. Ma Makeh Nefesh Behema. The same way when it comes to striking an animal's life. The Torah didn't differentiate whether you're inadvertent or purposeful. You have to pay. Af Makeh Nefesh Adam. So too when it comes on the flip side to striking a human being, Torah was not differentiating whether you're inadvertent or purposeful, you are exempt from payment. So we draw a parallel just with regards to comparing shogeg and mezid, not the practical law. Of course, when it comes to an animal, you always pay, or you mean you don't pay. The point is you always don't pay, even if you're inadvertent. And the Rambam says, Halacha Yudalid, V'chein hadin l'chol aveira sheyesh b'misas bezdin. This is the rule for all Averot, not just over here. Anytime you transgress a prohibition that has death penalty, she'ein ba tashlumin, you can never be held liable to pay. The classic Talmud's example is if a person burns down somebody's grain storage house on Shabbos. You got to pay or not? You don't have to pay. So since you're liable for death penalty for letting a fire on Shabbos, you don't have to pay for the damages that you caused. Called kamle b'dirabamine. You get the higher punishment. Halacha tezvav ba'aleha v'meisa. What if a man rapes a girl and then she dies? Hareza pater min haknas. He is exempt from the fine. Shenemar, because it says, where's the verse about the fine? V'nosan ha'ish ha'sheichiv ima la'avi hanara. The man who lay with her has to give the father of the girl money. That means he has to be the father of a live girl. Loi la'avi ha'meisa. Not to the father of a dead girl. V'hu, that's provided, shetamus kaidim shetamrid badin, that she dies before the case is heard by the court. Once the case is heard by the court and he's proven guilty, he has to pay the fine. Because at that point she was a live girl. She died later, that's a different issue. But now he has to pay the fine.